It was April 1945, the dying weeks of the war. The once proud Reich was collapsing in smoke and silence, its cities reduced to skeletal ruins. In a makeshift field hospital, near the outskirts of Magdeburg, 22-year-old German nurse Greta Mueller knelt beside a stretcher, her trembling fingers pressing a blood-soaked bandage to a soldier's chest. Outside, artillery thundered like the heartbeat of a dying giant. Each explosion shook dust from the rafters and sent glass tinkling to the floor. Greta's face was pale, streaked with soot, but her eyes were determined. She had sworn an oath to heal, not to flee. Then came the sirens, long, rising wails that cut through the chaos. Someone shouted, "They've broken through!" and panic swept the ward like wind through dry leaves. A captain, his uniform torn and stained, stumbled in and thrust a small glass vial into her palm. The liquid inside was clear, almost innocent-looking. "Cyanide," he whispered hoarsely. "Better this than what they'll do to you." His words trembled with conviction born from propaganda. Greta stared at the vial, its surface glinting under the flickering lights, and felt her stomach twist. She had heard the stories, how American soldiers tortured and humiliated German women, how they made their captives beg for mercy before killing them. When the first American voices echoed through the corridor, Greta's breath caught. Boots thudded on concrete. Rifles clattered. She backed toward a cot, clutching the vial so tightly it cut into her palm. A wounded soldier cried out, "Don't let them take us!" But before anyone could move, the bunker doors burst open. Silhouettes filled the entrance, rifles raised, flashlights cutting through the dust. Greta braced herself for shouting, for violence, for the end. Instead, she heard English words she barely understood. "Medical! We need medical help here." One of the soldiers stepped forward, his weapon slung over his shoulder. His eyes weren't cruel, they were tired. He pointed toward the doorway, where two civilians lay bleeding from shrapnel. "You're a nurse, right?" he asked, his accent thick but his tone gentle. Greta hesitated, confused. Then instinct took over. She dropped the vial, grabbed her bag, and ran to the injured. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The enemy was asking her to help their wounded. No one shouted. No one raised a hand against her. Instead, soldiers cleared a space, bringing blankets and morphine. One of them knelt beside her, pressing gauze into her hands. His name tag read Johnson R., and he couldn't have been older than 25. "Hold this," he said quietly, showing her where to apply pressure. His German was clumsy but kind. For the first time in months, Greta's trembling stopped. Hours passed in a blur of blood and bandages. When the shooting outside finally faded, the Americans offered her water and a ration biscuit. She took it hesitantly. It tasted bland, but it was food. Around her, the field hospital was transformed. The wounded were being carried out, the dead covered respectfully with blankets. No one mocked the fallen Germans. No one spat or kicked the bodies. It made no sense. Everything she'd believed had been wrong. That night, under the faint light of a flickering lantern, Greta sat in the corner of the bunker, the discarded cyanide vial lying in the dust beside her boot. The Americans had secured the area, but they didn't treat her as a prisoner. One young medic asked her about her training, impressed that she could stitch a wound with such precision. "You're good," he said. "Maybe you can help us tomorrow." She didn't know what to say. Later, as rain began to fall outside, she stepped to the doorway and looked toward the horizon. Fires glowed in the distance where the town once stood, the sky pulsing red with ruin. A soldier approached, holding a tin mug. "Coffee," he offered. The smell was bitter, foreign. She nodded, accepting it with shaking hands. He smiled faintly. But it's hot." As the warm liquid touched her lips, something inside her cracked. The stories she'd been told, the lies drilled into her heart about monstrous enemies, crumbled like ash. These men weren't demons. They were exhausted, homesick boys who spoke softly of wives and mothers, of farms and cities she'd never heard of. One showed her a photograph of a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. "My son," he said proudly, then tucked it away as though ashamed to be sentimental in war. When the rain eased, she returned to her cot, the sound of harmonica music drifting faintly from somewhere outside. For the first time in months, the night wasn't filled with screams. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the murmurs of the guards beyond the doorway. They spoke of home, of baseball, of things far removed from blood and rubble. Greta felt something unfamiliar stir inside her, doubt. If the Americans weren't monsters, then what had all of this been for? Her eyes closed slowly, the lantern's flame flickering out. The cyanide vial still glimmered faintly in the dust, a symbol of the fear she no longer fully believed in. As she drifted into uneasy sleep, the echo of the harmonica faded into silence. Tomorrow she would wake in a new kind of captivity, one she could not yet imagine. The war was over, but no one had told the prisoners. A week after her capture, Greta Mueller was herded with dozens of other German soldiers, medics and nurses, toward the waiting trucks. The grey morning smelled of damp earth and burned metal. Smoke rose from the hills behind them, where the last pockets of resistance had been silenced. Greta clutched her worn satchel of bandages and looked around at the faces beside her, some blank with shock, others defiant, most simply exhausted. They had all been told the same thing: captivity meant humiliation, starvation, and slow death. She expected cattle cars, shackles, and shouting guards. Instead, she saw military transport trucks, painted olive green, fitted with bench seats, canvas roofs to shield from rain. The American sergeant organizing them barked orders, but his voice carried no hatred. "Move it along, folks. We've got a long ride ahead." The word folks struck her like a spark of absurdity. Did he really just call us that? She climbed into one of the trucks, knees trembling, and found herself sitting across from a young American soldier reading a letter by the dim light filtering through the canvas flap. His uniform was neat, his helmet tilted back on his head. When their eyes met, he offered a cautious nod. The name tag on his chest read, Johnson R., the same soldier from the field hospital. He smiled slightly, then passed her a can of beans and a spoon. "Not the best," he said in slow German, "but it fills the belly." Greta hesitated, unsure if it was a trick, but hunger was stronger than fear. She took a small bite. It was salty, strange, but real food. Johnson ate from his own can, chewing thoughtfully. For a moment, the truck was silent except for the hum of the engine. Then, as rain began to fall, one of the guards moved down the line, handing out ponchos. Greta froze when the cloth landed in her lap. The Americans were giving them raincoats? She pulled it around her shoulders, the material thick and warm, and, first time since her capture, she felt something dangerously close to gratitude. Hours turned into days as the convoy rolled southward through the ravaged countryside. Towns they passed lay in ruins, their windows blown out, their churches roofless. Civilians stood silently on the roadside, watching the trucks with hollow eyes. In those faces Greta saw her own mother, her neighbors, her country, broken, bewildered, lost. At one rest stop, an older German woman collapsed while stepping down from a truck. Without hesitation, an American medic rushed to her side. Greta instinctively followed, kneeling beside him. "She's dehydrated," she murmured, checking the woman's pulse. The medic nodded, reaching for his kit. "Good eye," he said. "Help me with the fourth." They worked together silently, his hands steady, his voice calm. When the saline began to flow, color slowly returned to the woman's face. Greta looked at the medic's patch, U.S. Army Medical Corps. These were supposed to be their tormentors, yet he had treated her countrywoman as gently as he might his own grandmother. That night, they camped in an open field under a restless sky. The prisoners were given tents, blankets, and even hot coffee. Greta sat by the small fire, watching the guards talk among themselves. She didn't understand every word, but their laughter was soft, human, almost comforting. One of them strummed a harmonica, the notes rising and falling like sighs. Johnson joined her, holding 2 tin cups. "Coffee?" he asked again. She nodded. The bitterness made her wince, but the warmth sank deep into her bones. He pointed upward. "Texas," he said suddenly, his accent thick but cheerful. "That's where I'm from. Hot, flat, lots of cows." He mimed riding a horse, and for the first time Greta smiled. It startled her, that small flicker of joy amid ruin. The journey continued, weaving through roads lined with wildflowers and twisted metal. At every checkpoint, Greta braced herself for cruelty that never came. Instead, there were cigarettes passed through fences, polite conversation, and shared rations. The Americans seemed intent on showing that mercy didn't mean weakness. When the convoy finally crossed into the deep south, the air changed. It was heavier, sweet with humidity and magnolia. Greta pressed her face to the truck's flap, staring at the endless horizon. Cotton fields stretched like pale oceans, and the sun hung low and golden over the landscape. They stopped one last time before the final leg. Johnson leaned against the truck, watching her curiously. "Miss Mueller," he said slowly, testing the words, "you'll like where you're going." She frowned. "A prison?" He smiled faintly. "You'll see." The trucks rolled on for hours through winding roads flanked by pine forests. Finally, as the sun dipped below the trees, the destination came into view. Greta's heart clenched. Rows of buildings stood behind barbed wire fences, their roofs glinting in the fading light. The sign at the entrance read, "Camp Clinton, U.S. Army POW Facility." Her hands tightened on her satchel. This was it. The nightmare she'd been told about. The camp where she would vanish into obscurity. But as the trucks rolled closer, she saw something impossible. German prisoners laughing, playing baseball with American guards. Smoke rose from a cookhouse, carrying the smell of bread and roasted meat. Someone was playing harmonica near the gate. The sight made no sense. She turned to Johnson, confusion written across her face. "This is a camp?" she asked. He nodded, still smiling. "Yes, ma'am. Welcome to Mississippi." The gate opened, and the trucks rumbled through as twilight fell across the compound. Greta felt her fear dissolve into something else. Curiosity, disbelief, and a fragile spark of hope. Whatever lay ahead, it was not the hell she had imagined. Stop, beneath the blazing Mississippi sun, Greta blinked as the guards opened the flaps, and a wave of heat swept in, thick with pine and honeysuckle. She stepped down, her boots sinking into red dust. For a moment she simply stood there, caught between two worlds, the ruins of Germany behind her and this strange, vibrant land ahead. She braced for shouting, rifle cracks, humiliation. Instead, laughter drifted across the camp. A group of men in faded German uniforms were playing baseball with their American guards. Greta rubbed her eyes. It had to be a trick. But when the bat cracked again and someone called "Strike 3," cheers rose from both sides of the fence. Led toward a processing tent, she clutched her satchel tightly. Inside, army clerks sat behind wooden tables stacked with forms. The sergeant who waved her forward looked sunburned, chewing gum like it was a duty. Name, Greta Mueller. Occupation, nurse. He nodded. "You'll like Lieutenant Anderson. Runs the infirmary. Speaks good German, too. No interrogation, no threats, just paperwork." When he handed her a sheet labeled Property Inventory, Barrack Assignment, Rations Card, she felt dizzy. It was more like checking into a boarding school than a prison. Barrack 7 stood beneath tall trees. Inside, the air smelled of soap and clean linen. Beds lined the room neatly, each with a white sheet, a locker, even curtains. A round-faced woman with blonde curls looked up from sewing. "You're wondering if it's real," she said in German with a weary smile. "I did too. I'm Liesel. How long have you been here?" 3 months, she laughed softly, still waiting for the nightmare to start. That night, Greta lay on her cot, staring at the slow-turning fan above. Instead of screams, she heard a harmonica somewhere in the dark. The camp smelled of bread, not fear. For the first time in years, she slept deeply. Morning brought another surprise. A young American nurse entered the barrack, Lieutenant Sarah Anderson, tall, composed, speaking careful German. "I'm told you're a nurse, Miss Mueller," she said. "We could use your help. The infirmary treats everyone, Americans, Germans, civilians. Disease doesn't care about nationality." Greta blinked. "You want me to work with you?" "If you're willing," Anderson said simply. By afternoon, Greta was back in rhythm, washing wounds, preparing bandages, checking pulses. The infirmary was spotless, stocked with equipment she hadn't seen since before the war. When she suggested a suturing method from her hospital in Berlin, Dr. Mitchell tried it and smiled. "Good thinking, Mueller. Respect. It hit her harder than any bullet. Here, among enemies, she was valued as a professional. Lieutenant Anderson often discussed medical journals with her, eager to exchange ideas. There was no arrogance, only purpose. Meals were served in the mess hall, where German nurses and American medics ate side by side. The food was rich: eggs, vegetables, real meat. Guards cracked jokes in broken German, laughter rippled freely. While her family in Berlin starved, Greta was gaining weight in captivity. The guilt was sharp, but so was the gratitude. Weeks passed. The impossible became routine. The women hung curtains, crafted decorations, learned English. Evenings filled with quiet conversation, not fear. Greta began to write again, letters to her mother, to no one, to the war itself. "They treat us as people," she wrote. "I don't know how to feel, shame, maybe hope." December 1945 arrived with rumors of repatriation. Greta expected a bleak Christmas, but the Americans transformed the mess hall with evergreens and candles. A phonograph played carols in both languages, and on each table sat small gifts wrapped in brown paper. Lieutenant Anderson announced a new program. American families could adopt a prisoner for Christmas, sending care packages and letters. Greta's sponsors were the Hendersons of Jackson, Mississippi, a minister, his wife, and 2 daughters. Their letter came tied with a red ribbon. "Dear Greta," it began in careful German. "We know you are far from home. We can't replace your family, but Christian love crosses all boundaries. We pray for your safe return." Inside the parcel were cookies, warm socks, and a family photograph. But the note from 8-year-old Susan struck deepest. "Dear German lady, Mama says you help sick people like she does. Thank you for helping even when people are not German. I hope you see your Mama soon." Greta sat on her bunk for a long time, the letter trembling in her hands. Tears came quietly. That night she wrote back, "The Americans treat us with kindness I never imagined. I don't understand this war anymore, Mama. If these are our enemies, what does that make us?" Outside, the camp glowed with candlelight and laughter. Inside Barrack 7, Greta stared at the ceiling fan turning above her, and for the first time since the bombs fell on Berlin, felt something she had forgotten: peace. Frost crept across the windows of Barrack 7, and the camp's once green fields turned silver under the morning light. Life had settled into a rhythm that felt almost ordinary. Greta rose each dawn, tied her hair back, and reported to the infirmary. She worked alongside American and German nurses, their movements so synchronized that she sometimes forgot which side of the wire she belonged to. It was no longer us and them. It was only the sick and the healers. But beneath that fragile peace, questions festered. At night, when the lights dimmed, she caught herself thinking about her family in Berlin, the faces she might never see again. Were they safe? Were they starving? And why, she wondered, had her captors treated her with more dignity than her own commanders ever had? One grey morning, as she stacked bandages in the supply room, Lieutenant Anderson entered, carrying a bundle of newspapers. "We received these from Washington," she said. "They're making them available in the library for anyone who wants to read." Greta nodded absently, thinking nothing of it. But that evening curiosity drew her to the camp's small library, where the smell of ink and dust hung in the air. The newspapers lay spread across a long wooden table. The headlines screamed of a world still reeling from revelation. Camps liberated by Allied forces, atrocities beyond imagination. Greta froze. On the front page, printed in stark black and white, were photographs, grainy, horrifying, undeniable, piles of skeletal bodies, eyes sunken into skulls, survivors clinging to fences, their arms no thicker than twigs. Beneath one image, the caption read, "Bergen-Belsen, liberated by British troops." Her stomach turned. She forced herself to look closer, a nurse's instinct overpowering her revulsion. These were not staged pictures. The injuries, the sores, the emaciation, every detail screamed authenticity. She flipped through more pages, her breath quickening. Dachau, Buchenwald, Auschwitz. The names blurred together in a tide of horror. Around her, other prisoners whispered, some denying what they saw, others weeping openly. One man slammed a fist against the table. "Lies!" he shouted. More Allied propaganda. But even as he spoke, his voice cracked. Greta felt her knees weaken. She sank onto a bench, staring at the images until her vision blurred. These camps bore the insignia of her homeland. The guards in the background wore German uniforms, and suddenly, every comforting illusion she'd held onto collapsed. Later that week, the camp organized what they called educational assemblies. American officers, psychologists, and even priests came to speak with the prisoners. Among them was Dr. Abraham Goldstein, a Jewish-American psychiatrist. He stood before them, thin, bespectacled, his voice calm but firm. "Collective guilt is poison," he told the room. "It paralyzes people. What matters is individual responsibility. You can't undo what was done, but you can ensure it never happens again." His words pierced Greta like a needle. Here was a man whose people had been slaughtered, yet he spoke not of vengeance but of healing. She watched him after the meeting, counseling a trembling young German who confessed to guarding a train of prisoners. Goldstein placed a hand on his shoulder. "You cannot change yesterday," he said softly, "but you can decide what kind of man you'll be tomorrow." That night, Greta walked the perimeter of the camp, her thoughts heavy. The barbed wire shimmered under the moonlight, dividing her from the pine forest beyond. She realized the fence no longer symbolized captivity. It was a mirror, reflecting the moral divide between what she had been told and what she now knew. Months later, in the spring of 1946, her name appeared on the repatriation list. Camp Clinton prepared for departure with unexpected solemnity. For many, the camp had become a strange sanctuary, a place where the enemy had shown mercy. When trucks lined up to leave, guards and prisoners shook hands, exchanged photographs, even embraced. Lieutenant Anderson approached Greta with a small leather-bound notebook. "For your notes," she said, smiling. "You're a fine nurse, Greta. I hope one day we'll work together again. In peace." Greta's throat tightened. "You taught me more than medicine," she whispered. "You taught me mercy." The Henderson family sent one last package. Biscuits, vitamins, a photo of their daughters holding a sign that read, "Merry Christmas, Miss Greta." She held it against her chest as the trucks rolled away. The journey home was quiet and strangely civilized. The ships were clean, the food ample, the guards respectful. Yet as they approached Hamburg, Greta's heart clenched. From the deck she saw a city flattened to dust. The harbor where she'd once walked with her father was now a wasteland of twisted metal. The air stank of ash and salt. When she finally reached Berlin, it was worse. Entire neighborhoods were rubble. Her family's apartment was gone, reduced to a crater. After days of searching, she found her mother living in a basement with 12 other survivors, thin as paper and wrapped in blankets. The reunion was silent, their tears doing the speaking. Her mother handed her a bowl of American beef stew, part of the relief rations distributed by occupation forces. "After what we did," she murmured, "they could let us starve. But they feed us. I don't understand it." Greta did not either. But she felt the truth forming quietly in her chest, that compassion could outlast hatred, that mercy could rebuild what bombs had destroyed. That night, she wrote in the notebook Anderson had given her, "They conquered us, yet they saved us. Perhaps this is what true victory looks like." As she blew out the candle, the city outside lay silent under the moon, broken but alive. It filtered weakly through the cracks of Berlin's broken skyline. The war was long over, but for Greta Mueller, peace did not come with parades or victory marches. It came in quiet moments, in the soft voice of a child asking for food, in the heartbeat of a patient she managed to save. The city was a shell of its former self. Rubble filled the streets, and the air still smelled faintly of smoke and stone dust, yet life stirred amid the ruins. Greta found work at a relief clinic run jointly by German and American medical organizations. It was small, just a few rooms and a handful of volunteers, but every day people came, refugees from the East, mothers with hollow faces, children who flinched at the sound of airplanes. The skills she had learned at Camp Clinton were now her greatest tools. The Americans she once feared had taught her to lead with compassion rather than command, to see patients not as Germans or foreigners, but as human beings. Her colleagues often marveled at her calm, her refusal to turn anyone away. "You treat everyone the same," one doctor said. even the people who might have worked for the party. Greta smiled faintly. If the Americans could treat us as people after what we did, she said, then I have no right to do less. Letters from America continued to arrive, each one a small miracle amid the hunger and despair. The Henderson family wrote regularly, updates about their daughters, stories of church picnics, photographs of gardens in full bloom. Lieutenant Anderson sent a medical journal every few months, its pages marked with notes in the margins. Thought you'd find this technique useful, one message read in careful handwriting. Sometimes even Corporal Johnson sent postcards from Texas, sunsets over open fields, horses grazing, skies too big to imagine. Each letter reminded Greta that kindness was not a gesture, it was a bridge. It reached across oceans, across histories soaked in blood. Years passed. Germany rebuilt brick by brick, and so did Greta. She married Hinrich Weber, another relief worker who shared her quiet determination to heal rather than hate. They had 3 children and moved to a small town in West Germany where she opened a clinic. Her patients called her Frau Dr. Greta, though she never sought titles. She was known for listening before speaking, for offering comfort before advice. To her children, she told the story of Camp Clinton not as a tale of suffering, but as a testament to what humanity could be at its best. Enemies can become friends, she would say, stirring soup on the stove. But only if one side dares to be kind first. In 1953, a letter arrived with an American postmark that made her heart stop. It was from Lieutenant Sarah Anderson. Camp Clinton, she wrote, was closing. The U.S. Army Medical Corps planned a reunion of the nurses and doctors who had once worked there, both American and German. Would you come as our guest? The letter ended, "You taught us as much as we taught you." Greta stared at the page for a long time. 8 years had passed since she'd left Mississippi, yet she could still smell the magnolias, still hear the harmonica songs in the humid night. The idea of returning seemed impossible, until Hinrich placed his hand on hers and said softly, "You should go." The journey back was surreal. The same voyage that had once carried her as a prisoner now carried her as an honored guest. When she arrived in Jackson, the Henderson family was waiting with flowers and tearful smiles. Their daughters were grown now. Susan, the little girl who had written the letter that once made her cry, hugged her tightly. "Mama says you're part of our family," she whispered. At Camp Clinton, now a training base, Barrack 7 still stood. Inside, the reunion was filled with laughter and tears. Old colleagues embraced, swapping memories of bandages and surgeries performed in the sweltering southern heat. Lieutenant Anderson, her hair streaked with grey, greeted. "I told them you'd come," she said, voice trembling. "We never forgot you." When the speeches began, Greta was asked to address the new generation of American nurses seated in the audience. She stood behind the podium, the same sunlit Mississippi sky glowing through the windows. Her hands shook slightly as she began to speak. "I was once your enemy," she said. "I believed the lies they told me, that Americans were cruel, that mercy was weakness. But in this place I learned the truth. You showed me that even in war, humanity can survive. You proved that healing is stronger than hatred, and that compassion is not a tactic, it is victory." The hall was silent. Some nurses wiped their eyes. Greta paused, her gaze drifting to the old photograph pinned to her notebook, her barrack at Christmas, the letter from Susan, the smile of Lieutenant Anderson. "Mercy," she continued softly, "does not erase what happened, but it transforms what can come after. Because of what you did here, a German nurse learned how to be a better human being, and she taught her children the same." Applause rose slowly, then thundered through the hall. Her words would later be translated into several languages and shared among military academies as part of a lecture series on ethics and compassion in wartime. Decades slipped by. Greta grew old, her hair turning the color of the hospital sheets she had once folded. The world around her healed in ways she had never dared dream. Germany and America became allies. Trade and friendship replaced hatred. Sometimes, sitting by the window with her grandchildren, she would take out the faded letters from Mississippi and let them read aloud. "Grandma," one of them once asked, Why did they treat you so well if you were their prisoner? Greta smiled gently. Because they chose to see me as a person before they saw me as an enemy. In the quiet of her final years, she often thought of that barbed wire fence in Mississippi. It had seemed like cold, sharp, unbreakable. But looking back, she realized it had been something else entirely, a fragile boundary between cruelty and compassion, fear and forgiveness, war and peace. And on that sweltering afternoon in 1945, both sides had reached across it. For Greta Mueller, paradise had not been freedom, or even homecoming. Paradise had been the simple, radical kindness of those who refused to let war define their humanity.